There is a very specific quiet hiss that a 6-burner stainless steel Wolf gas range makes when the dial is turned to light, but the igniter is deliberately kept from catching a spark. It's a soft, continuous serpentine whisper. If you aren't paying close attention, you might mistake it for the autumn wind brushing against the storm windows, or the distant, settling hum of the sub-zero refrigerator. But I was paying attention. I had been paying very close attention for quite some time. I sat perfectly still on the cool slate tile floor of my walk-in pantry. The heavy wooden door cracked open just a fraction of an inch. It was exactly 3:15 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon. The October sun was streaming through the kitchen windows, pooling brightly on the Brazilian cherry hardwood floors that I had painstakingly restored 7 years ago. Everything looked perfectly normal. Everything looked exactly like the quiet, secure life I had spent 3 decades building. But creeping across those beautiful floors, invisible and heavy, was the sharp, unmistakable stench of raw mercaptan. That foul, rotten egg chemical additive they mix into natural gas so you know when you're in danger, so you know when to panic, so you know when to run. I didn't run. Some women fall apart when they realize the people they love most are actively trying to destroy them. I am not that woman. I simply get very, very quiet. Through the narrow slit of the pantry door I could hear her. Chloe, my 29-year-old daughter-in-law. She was walking away from the kitchen island, her expensive leather mules clicking a sharp, rhythmic tempo against the hardwood. She was humming. It was a light, breathy rendition of whatever pop song was currently trending on her social media feeds. The sheer, terrifying casualness of it was almost magnificent to witness. She wasn't fleeing a terrible mistake. She was leisurely strolling away from a trap she had just carefully, deliberately set. I looked down at my hands. In my right palm rested my iPhone 14, the midnight black metal cool and grounding against my skin. At my feet lay Barnaby, my 12-week-old golden retriever puppy. He was dead asleep, his soft golden chin resting heavily on the toe of my left shearling slipper. His small chest rose and fell in a steady, peaceful rhythm, completely oblivious to the toxic cloud, slowly filling the room just 10 feet away. I reached down and stroked the soft, downy fur behind Barnaby's ears. He let out a tiny, contented sigh and leaned into my touch without waking. The hardest discipline in the world isn't taking action. It's having the absolute power to end a situation, and choosing to sit in the dark and wait instead. It took every ounce of restraint in my body not to scoop the dog up, march out there, and demand answers. That is the instinct of a mother, isn't it? To fix, to correct. To immediately neutralize the threat and restore order to the house. But I knew if I walked out of this pantry right now, Chloe would simply play dumb. She would widen her perfectly lined eyes, press her manicured hands to her chest in mock horror and gasp. "Oh my God, Margaret, did I leave the burner on? I was just wiping down the stove. I'm so clumsy." She would spin it into an innocent accident. Just a silly, harmless oversight by a distracted girl. But it wasn't an accident. I knew that with a cold, terrifying certainty that made my blood run sluggish in my veins. I knew it because I already knew what she and my son were planning. I knew exactly what the narrative was supposed to be. Margaret is slipping. Margaret is a danger to herself. Margaret almost blew up the house today. You can spend decades building a home, giving until giving feels like breathing, only to discover that the cold you should have feared wasn't outside your windows. It was sleeping in your guest room. The smell of gas was growing stronger now, beginning to lightly sting the back of my throat. It was seeping under the pantry door, mingling grotesquely with the scent of the imported Tuscan olive oils and dried lavender bundles I kept on the lower shelves. My heart beat a slow, measured drum in my chest, not out of panic, but out of a profound, hollow sadness, the kind of sadness that leaves no room for tears. I tapped my phone screen to check the time. 3:18 p.m. 3 full minutes the gas had been running. 3 minutes of deliberate, calculated sabotage. I needed to let it run just a few moments longer. I needed her to be absolutely certain she had gotten away with it. I needed her to feel entirely secure in her victory before I emerged. Barnaby shifted in his sleep, his little paws twitching as he chased some imaginary rabbit in his dreams. I gently placed my hand flat against his ribs, feeling the steady thrum of his heartbeat, grounding myself in the innocence of this tiny creature while the humans in my house plotted my ruin. The air in the pantry was getting thick. I knew I couldn't stay in here much longer without risking the puppy's health. I had to end the experiment. I had to step out, turn off the valve, push open the windows, and play my part in their sick little play. I had to emerge as the confused, failing mother they so desperately needed me to be. I took one last shallow breath of the tainted air, committing the bitter smell of betrayal to memory. I sat perfectly still as the smell of raw gas filled my kitchen, waiting to see just how far my own son's wife was willing to go to declare me legally incompetent. My name is Margaret. I am 58 years old, and I did not inherit the quiet, comfortable life I currently possess. I carved it out of absolute tragedy with my own two bare hands. Let's talk about the house for a moment. It's an $850,000, four-bedroom colonial sitting on 1.2 acres of meticulously maintained Kentucky bluegrasses in West Hartford, Connecticut. It has original crown molding, two wood-burning fireplaces, and a wraparound mahogany porch. Every single brick, every slate shingle, every inch of that Brazilian cherry hardwood you just heard about. It is entirely paid for, free and clear, by me. My husband Robert died exactly 18 years ago this November. He was 40 years old. He suffered a massive sudden cerebral aneurysm in the produce aisle of the local Stop and Shop on Farmington Avenue. One minute he was reaching for a bundle of organic asparagus, and the next he was gone before his head even struck the linoleum floor. I was left a 40-year-old widow with a grieving 14-year-old boy, a mountain of unexpected medical debt, and a mortgage that felt like a boulder resting permanently on my chest. The thing about raising a son alone is that you stop keeping score. You just give. You give until giving feels like breathing. And then one day, someone you gave everything to looks you in the eye and asks what exactly you've contributed. I didn't crumble when Robert died because crumbling does not pay the electric bill. I went to work. For the next 14 years, I worked brutal, mind-numbing double shifts as a senior administrator at Hartford Hospital. I traded every weekend, every holiday, and every potential vacation for overtime pay and double-time shifts. I survived on 3 hours of sleep, lukewarm hospital cafeteria coffee, and a quiet, burning determination that my son, David, would never feel the sheer financial terror that kept me awake at 2 a.m. When David went off to Boston University, I wrote the checks, all of them. He graduated with a degree in business and 0 student loans, subsidized entirely by the years of my life I had willingly traded away in sterile hospital corridors. Grief is a luxury for the rich. The rest of us just have to set the alarm clock, swallow the lump in our throats, and go to work. David is 32 now. If you ask him what he does for a living, he will look you dead in the eye and call himself a crypto consultant. As far as I can tell, this is simply a polite, modern term for an unemployed man who spends 14 hours a day staring at digital line graphs on the $3,000 MacBook Pro I bought him for his birthday. I love my son, I truly, deeply do. But a mother's love does not blind me to the fact that he has grown soft, aggressively entitled, and entirely allergic to actual, sustained labor. And then there is Chloe. Chloe is 29. She lists her occupation on her tax returns, assuming she even files them, as a lifestyle influencer. In reality, she spends her days arranging free PR packages of $400 La Mer skincare serums on my marble countertops, filming herself drinking $9 iced matcha lattes, and complaining into her front-facing camera about how draining the creative process is. She has the kind of ruthlessly expensive tastes that are usually funded by a generational trust fund. In her case, they are funded by the rapidly depleting savings of her husband, and, by extension, her mother-in-law. You don't realize how much you've failed as a parent until you see the kind of person your child is willing to bankrupt himself to impress. 4 months ago, on the morning of June 12th, David called me in tears. The crypto market had crashed, their luxury apartment lease in Boston was up, and they were completely out of options. They just needed a place to land, he begged, a temporary harbor to catch their breath. They proposed moving into my 800-square-foot guest suite over the detached garage, swearing it would only be until they could save $60,000 for a down payment on a modest starter home of their own. What mother says no to her only child in crisis? I spent 3 days clearing out the guest suite, painted the walls a fresh, crisp linen white, and welcomed them in with open arms. I told myself it would be nice to have the company in such a large, quiet house. I told myself it would be strictly temporary. I didn't realize that from the exact moment Chloe dragged her 6 oversized aluminum Rimowa suitcases across my threshold, she was mentally measuring my master bedroom for her own mid-century modern furniture. I thought I was providing a temporary safety net for my only child, but I didn't realize I was inviting 2 spiders into my carefully built web. It started small, it always does. You don't jump straight to faking a gas leak. You build the foundation of doubt brick by brick, making your victim question their own reality before you strike. My heavy set of Lexus car keys, the ones with the silver medical alert tag, mysteriously vanished from the brass entryway hook. I spent an hour tearing the house apart. 3 hours later, I found them sitting next to a head of romaine lettuce in my Sub-Zero crisper drawer. I stared at them, a cold prickle of unease washing over the back of my neck. I chalked it up to fatigue. But then my $500 tortoise shell Tom Ford prescription reading glasses disappeared from my nightstand. 2 days later, they materialized neatly folded on the edge of the porcelain sink in the guest suite bathroom. I was standing in the hallway, holding the glasses, trying to remember if I had even walked into that room, when Chloe drifted out. She tilted her head, her voice dripping with a syrup so sweet it made my teeth ache. "Are you feeling okay, Maggie? You've been so forgetful lately. I'm really starting to get worried." True malice doesn't announce itself with a shout. It whispers disguised as concern. The subtle digs I could ignore, convincing myself I was just a tired older woman. The active sabotage I could not. On Tuesday, August 14th, I drove 20 minutes across town for my biannual checkup with Dr. Eris Thorne, my cardiologist. When I arrived at the reception desk, the nurse looked at me in utter confusion. "Margaret, your daughter-in-law called yesterday and canceled. She said you were having a bad week and were too disoriented to make the drive safely." I stood frozen in the waiting room, the fluorescent lights suddenly buzzing too loudly in my ears. I hadn't had a bad week. I hadn't been disoriented. I had been perfectly fine, balancing my mutual fund portfolios and pruning the hydrangeas. A creeping sensation of dread began to pool in my stomach. They were actively intervening in my medical care. They were building a paper trail. I came home early that Tuesday. I wish I hadn't. But I also know that if I hadn't, I would have spent the rest of my life not knowing why everything felt wrong. The catalyst for the absolute truth was Barnaby. I bought the golden retriever puppy over Labor Day weekend. He was a beautiful, clumsy bundle of joy, but he was also a relentless chewer of baseboards and antique table legs. To keep an eye on him while I ran to the grocery store or the bank, I logged onto Amazon. I spent exactly 140.48 on a 4-pack of discreet, wise security cameras. They were brilliantly designed. They didn't look like bulky security equipment. They looked exactly like standard white USB charging blocks. You just plug them directly into a wall outlet, and nobody gives them a second glance. I put one in the kitchen, one in the living room, one in the entryway, and one plugged into the weatherproof outlet out on the back patio, right near the teak wood furniture. On Tuesday afternoon, September 28th, I was sitting in my parked car outside the dry cleaners at 1:15 p.m. I opened the Wise app on my iPhone to check if Barnaby was chewing the Persian rug. The living room was empty, so I toggled over to the patio camera. I didn't hear the puppy. Instead, I heard the crisp, high-definition audio of David and Chloe sitting outside, drinking my San Pellegrino water, just inches from the hidden microphone. "The power of attorney legal fees will cost about $2,000, David was saying, his voice perfectly calm and businesslike, as if he were discussing the weather. "Once we have that signed off by a judge, we can transfer the deed of the house into my LLC. Sunny Pines Memory Care has a bed opening up late next month. It's $6,000 a month, but her retirement accounts will cover it. We just need one more incident to prove to the doctors she's an active danger to herself." Chloe laughed, a light musical sound that made me physically nauseous. "Thank God, Dave. I cannot look at her dated floral wallpaper for another week. We need to gut the entire downstairs as soon as she's gone." If you've ever had your kindness mistaken for stupidity by the people you love most, hit the subscribe button. You'll want to see how this ends. Hearing your own flesh and blood price out your freedom is a very specific kind of heartbreak. But heartbreak is just anger that hasn't found its focus yet. I drove home from the dry cleaners at 1:45 p.m. I did not storm into the house. I did not scream or weep or throw my son's luggage onto the freshly mowed front lawn. I walked through the front door, set my keys precisely on the brass entryway hook where they belonged, and kissed the top of Barnaby's golden head. Some women fall apart when they find out the truth. I am not that woman. I made coffee, sat at my kitchen table, and started making a list. Outwardly, I leaned into the role they had so carefully cast me in. I became the failing, forgetful old woman they so desperately needed. At breakfast the very next morning, I poured myself a cup of black coffee and asked David what time his virtual meeting was. 10 minutes later, I looked up from my iPad and asked him the exact same question. I watched, completely expressionless behind my digital newspaper, as David and Chloe exchanged a knowing, triumphant glance over their avocado toast. Chloe actually bit her lower lip to hide a smirk. The most dangerous place to put an intelligent woman is inside a box you assume she is too weak to break out of. While they spent their days mentally spending my life insurance, I spent my days quietly dismantling their future. I started with the house. On Thursday, October 1st, I ordered a premium upgrade to my home's Sonos smart speaker system. I paid $1,800 out of pocket. I told Chloe it was an innocent, early Christmas gift to myself because my hearing wasn't quite what it used to be. I made sure the new Sonos Arc soundbar in the living room and the Era 300 speakers in the dining room were perfectly synced to my iPhone 14 via a dedicated Bluetooth connection. Next, I secured the evidence. I downloaded every single audio and video file from the 4Wise cameras. I uploaded the MP4 files into a heavily encrypted, password-protected Dropbox cloud drive, secured with two-factor authentication. I made 3 separate digital backups. No matter what happened to my phone, or if they somehow discovered the physical cameras, that audio was immortal. You don't need to raise your voice to win a war. You just need to quietly hold all the ammunition. On Monday morning, while David and Chloe were out test driving a $75,000 Range Rover they couldn't afford, I drove downtown to Pearl Street in Hartford. I took the brass-paneled elevator to the 14th floor to visit Thomas Sterling. Thomas is a 62-year-old, fiercely intelligent estate lawyer and my late husband's oldest friend. He is not a man who suffers fools, and he had never entirely trusted my daughter-in-law. I sat in Thomas's leather armchair, placed my phone on his heavy mahogany desk, and hit play. He listened to the entire patio recording in total silence. When it was over, he didn't gasp. He didn't say a word. He just opened a fresh, legal-sized yellow notepad, unscrewed his Mont Blanc fountain pen, and looked at me. Over the next 3 hours, Thomas and I systematically fortified my life. We drafted a bulletproof, irrevocable trust. I transferred the title of my $850,000 Connecticut home, along with all my Vanguard retirement accounts and mutual funds, directly into the trust, naming a strict third-party fiduciary. David was legally and permanently stripped of any future power of attorney. If I were to ever fall ill or be deemed incompetent, the trust dictated that my assets would be frozen, completely inaccessible to anyone but my medical team. When you realize the people you fed are trying to bite your hand, you don't pull the hand away. You just replace the meat with steel. Finally, Thomas drafted 2 very important documents: a formal, legally binding 30-day eviction notice and a preliminary restraining order barring Chloe from the primary residence. He placed both documents into a thick, unmarked manila folder and handed it to me. We agreed he would be in the neighborhood the following Sunday evening. The trap was set. The legal paperwork was signed. The audio was primed. Now, I just had to wait for them to make their final, fatal mistake. I didn't have to wait long. If you've made it this far, do us one quick favor. Subscribe. A lot of people watch without ever doing it, but it costs you nothing and means everything to us. Thank you, genuinely. They thought they were setting a brilliant trap for a failing mind, completely unaware that I was already holding the trigger to the steel jaws closing around their ankles. It was exactly 4:15 p.m. when I finally pushed open the pantry door, letting the heavy, nauseating scent of unlit gas wash over me completely. I walked into the kitchen, purposefully trembling my hands, and called out for David in a thin, deliberately fragile voice. He rushed downstairs, playing the role of the terrified, devoted son with an Oscar-worthy performance. He threw open the kitchen windows, dramatically twisted the dial of the Wolf range to the off position, and practically carried me to the living room couch. The most pathetic part of watching someone lie to you is knowing exactly how much time they spent practicing their concerned face in the bathroom mirror. By 6:30 p.m., the house was thoroughly aired out and we were sitting around the mahogany dining table. The menu was my famous slow-cooked pot roast, rich with pearl onions alongside honey-glazed roasted carrots. The table was set perfectly with my grandmother's vintage Royal Doulton fine china. I poured myself a generous glass of 2018 Duckhorn Merlot. To anyone looking through the dining room windows, we were the absolute picture of the perfect modern American family recovering from a brief scare. A final meal with an enemy always tastes infinitely better when you know it is their last supper in your kingdom. We ate in silence for about 10 minutes. I watched Chloe gracefully cut a small piece of roast beef, her diamond wedding band catching the light of the crystal chandelier above us. Finally, David cleared his throat and set down his linen napkin. The moment had arrived. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, adopting a posture of deep, burdensome sorrow. Chloe immediately stopped chewing, her face falling into a perfectly synchronized mask of profound sympathy. "Mom," David began, his voice thick with rehearsed emotion. "Chloe and I have been talking. What happened today in the kitchen, it was terrifying. You could have blown the whole house up. We love you so much, but it's just not safe for you here alone anymore." He paused, letting the heavy silence fill the room, ensuring the gravity of his next words landed. "It's time to look into Sunny Pines Memory Care. They have a beautiful facility, 24-hour nursing staff, and a bed opening up next month. We can handle the house for you while you transition. You can dress betrayal up in a designer sweater and soft words, but it will always reek of absolute cowardice. I didn't yell. I didn't weep or ask him how he could possibly do this to his own mother. I simply reached for my wine glass. I took a very slow, very deliberate sip of the dark red Merlot, letting the rich notes of plum and cedar settle on my tongue. I set the glass down exactly in the center of my coaster. Then, I picked up my iPhone 14. I tapped the Spotify app, seamlessly bypassing the music and opening the encrypted Dropbox file I had favorited earlier that afternoon. Without saying a single word, I pressed play. Instantly, the $1,800 Sonos sound system I had installed that week roared to life. Because I had synced the ARC soundbar in the living room and the Era 300 speakers in the dining room, the audio didn't just play. It fully enveloped the space in crisp, undeniable, high-definition surround sound. Chloe's recorded voice echoed loudly off the Brazilian cherry hardwood floors. "Just leave the burner on, Dave. We'll tell the doctor she nearly blew the house up. It's the final proof we need." Then David's recorded voice replied from the patio, completely clear, completely damning. "Sunny Pine's memory care is $6,000 a month, but her retirement accounts will cover it. Once we have the power of attorney signed off by a judge, we can transfer the deed of the house into my LLC. Guilt has a very specific weight. You can actually watch it crush a person's spine in real time." David's face drained of blood so rapidly it looked as though he were entering sudden cardiac arrest. He froze, his mouth slightly open, his eyes darting frantically toward the ceiling speakers, as if he could somehow physically grab the sound waves and shove them back into the digital ether. Chloe dropped her heavy silver fork. It clattered violently against her fine china plate, a sharp ringing sound that cut through the silence following the recording. She looked at me, her perfectly lined eyes wide with unadulterated terror. At 6:45 p.m. exactly, heavy footsteps echoed from the darkened living room alcove. Thomas, my late husband's 62-year-old estate lawyer, stepped into the light of the dining room. He had been standing there silently for 30 minutes, a silent witness to the entire theatrical production. Thomas did not speak. He walked calmly over to my son. He placed a thick, unmarked manila folder containing the 30-day eviction notice and the preliminary restraining order directly into David's trembling hands. Thomas looked down at the boy he had known since birth, gave a single, curt, profoundly disgusted shake of his head, and stepped back. David reached across the table to grab my hand and beg for forgiveness, but I simply pulled away. The only thing left to decide was how many hours they had to pack their bags. It is exactly 3 weeks later. The calendar on my Sub-Zero refrigerator reads October 22nd. The house is blessedly, perfectly quiet. There is no forced, breathy pop music humming from the kitchen island. There are no heavy aluminum suitcases scratching the Brazilian cherry hardwoods. There is only the soft rhythmic rustle of the ancient oak trees in the backyard, swaying gently in the cool autumn twilight. Peace isn't just the absence of noise. It is the permanent eviction of the people who make you doubt your own sanity. I am sitting on the back porch steps, a cup of chamomile tea resting beside me on the mahogany floorboards. Barnaby is sitting between my knees. He is noticeably bigger now, his puppy clumsiness slowly giving way to the sturdy frame of a proper golden retriever. I hold a wire bristle brush in my right hand, rhythmically working it through his thick golden coat. He leans into the pressure, letting out a long, contented sigh that carries away the last bit of tension in my shoulders. It took David and Chloe exactly 36 hours to vacate the premises. Thomas Sterling saw to that. He didn't just hand them the paperwork and leave. He parked his black Lincoln Town car at the end of my driveway and sat there, reading the Wall Street Journal, until the very last box was loaded into a rented U-Haul van. You cannot buy loyalty, but you can certainly stop funding betrayal, and it is astonishing how quickly the entitled crumble when the bank finally closes its doors. I hear through the quiet neighborhood grapevine that they are currently renting a 400-square-foot studio apartment in East Hartford, situated directly above a 24-hour laundromat. Chloe's lifestyle influencer career has taken a rather sudden, unglamorous hiatus. It is incredibly difficult, I imagine, to film aesthetic skincare routines when your vanity is wedged between a humming radiator and a miniature folding dining table. The $75,000 Range Rover they test drove remained at the dealership. David is now desperately applying for entry-level data entry positions, having learned the hard way that crypto consulting does not pay the security deposit on a 6-month lease. As for the $850,000 estate, it remains safely locked inside the irrevocable trust. I updated my will the morning after they left. Upon my passing, which I intend to be many, many decades from now, the entirety of my assets will be liquidated and donated to the cardiology wing at Hartford Hospital, the very place where I spent 14 years scrubbing floors and pushing papers to ensure my son had a future he ultimately took for granted. Grieving a child who is still alive is a strange, hollow process, but I do not cry for the man who sat at my dining table and calmly priced out my freedom. I only mourn the little boy I once knew, the one I raised, who somehow lost his way in a world that values appearance over character. Some wounds don't heal. They just become the armor you wear for the rest of your life. The sun is fully below the horizon now, painting the Connecticut sky in deep shades of indigo and violet. The air is crisp and clean, smelling only of fallen leaves and wood smoke from a neighbor's chimney. I set the dog brush down, take a sip of my warm tea, and look at the beautiful, quiet fortress I built with my own 2 hands. They mistook a mother's patience for weakness, never realizing that the woman who taught you how to walk knows exactly how to sweep the legs right out from under you. If you like this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories. And as always, thank you for being a part of this.